Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. We're all about turning complex info into, well, clearer insights. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a pretty powerful document, one that's definitely made some waves in the public health world. We're focusing on a really revealing letter of resignations from a high-ranking official at the CDC, Dr. Demetre C. Daskalakis. He was the director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. And look, this isn't just your standard I quit letter. It's very direct. It outlines some significant concerns about where public health policy is heading in America right now. Our mission today. Let's unpack Dr. Daskalakis' main reasons for leaving. We want to highlight the specific examples he points to and sort of understand the bigger picture, the implications he suggests for public health in this country. We'll pull out the key insights so you can quickly get the essence of this, well, critical development and why it might matter to you.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here, I think, is that this letter isn't just about one person leaving their job, right? It gives us this unique window into the internal tensions, the challenges that a really vital public health institution seems to be facing. It kind of invites us all to think about that crucial balance between, solid science, the practical side of public policy, and absolutely effective, transparent communication, especially when you're talking about protecting the health of, well, everyone.
Okay, let's begin by breaking down his key arguments then. We're looking at why Dr. Daskalakis felt he really had to resign effective August 28, 2025, especially after a career so, deeply committed to public health. So what does he actually state as the fundamental reason for stepping away from such a key role?
Well, at its heart, he says that the views being shared by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his staff, they fundamentally challenge his ability to stay in that position. He uses really direct language. He says he is unable to serve in an environment that treats CDC as a tool to generate policies and materials that do not reflect scientific reality and are designed to hurt rather than to improve the public's health. That's a pretty strong statement. It really conveys this profound sense of misalignment with what he sees as the agency's core mission.
Wow. Okay, and digging a bit deeper into that reasoning, he talks about needing to align his professional duties with his system of ethics and also his understanding of the science of infectious disease, immunology, and my promise to serve the American people. How does framing it like that as a conflict of principles, not just, say, a policy disagreement, how does that change things? Does it elevate the gravity?
Oh, absolutely. It really crystallizes the personal and professional stakes involved here. For Dr. Daskalakis, this clearly isn't just a simple difference of opinion on strategy or something. It's what he perceives as a conflict with his basic scientific understanding and his ethical duties. And, when an official feels they just cannot square their duties with their core principles, that suggests a really profound institutional challenge, something that goes way beyond just day-to-day policy debates. It speaks to, well, maybe a perceived breach of trust in the very foundation of scientific integrity.
Right, and he doesn't just leave it at these general statements, does he? He gives some very specific examples of policies, practices that he says pushed him to this decision. What's the first big concern he flags in the letter, specifically about data and policy?
Yeah, he highlights a recent change in the adult and children's immunization schedule, pretty critical area. He states these changes threaten the lives of the youngest Americans and pregnant people. And crucially, he claims that the data analyses that supported this decision have never been shared with CDC despite my respectful requests to HHS, that's the Department of Health and Human Services, of course, and other leadership. So, yeah, that's a significant allegation. It implies a real lack of transparency, maybe collaboration on a key health policy, especially one affecting vulnerable groups.
Wow. Okay. So a major policy change directly hitting vulnerable people and the data supposedly backing it up, withheld from the relevant CDC experts. That's not just like a communication slip up. That feels like a challenge to how science is supposed to work in policy, doesn't it? Does he speculate at all on why this lack of transparency or how widespread he thought it was?
He doesn't explicitly spell out motivations, no. But the implication, reading between the lines, is that this lack of transparency might be, well, systemic. He definitely connects it to broader worries about data integrity. For instance, he brings up a frequently asked questions document, an FAQ that was apparently circulated by HHS without getting input from CDC subject matter experts first. And even more concerning, he says it cited studies that did not support the conclusions that were attributed to these authors. That just raises massive questions about the integrity of the information being put out there for the public.
Yeah, that's serious. And he uses some strong words here, right? He calls it radical non-transparency and unskilled manipulation of data to achieve a political end rather than the good of the American people.
Hmm.
What does that kind of language and the practice he's describing suggest about the relationship between science and policy in this whole situation?
Well, it suggests a fundamental flip, doesn't it, of the usual scientific process. Normally, policy should be informed by vetted data. But Dr. Daskalakis seems to be alleging that data is being twisted or manipulated to justify policies that are already decided, or, for political reasons. And that can just severely damage public trust, because it implies the information people need for health decisions isn't actually based on objective science.
Right, the trust factor is huge. Okay, so beyond these data issues, his letter also details a pretty significant breakdown in communication channels. How did that play into his decision?
That seems to be a major piece, too. He describes big policy changes being announced through social media posts without prior notice. Things like X posts, or he mentions poorly scripted videos. And he states this forced CDC staff to essentially retrofit analyses and policy actions just to match these public announcements. So you're making the science fit a story that's already out there instead of the other way around. This kind of reactive policymaking, driven by, tweets or whatever, can deeply compromise the scientific integrity and the careful, methodical approach you expect from an agency like the CDC.
Making science fit the narrative, not the other way around. And he actually lists examples of this. Can you walk us through a couple of those that really stood out to him as illustrating this problem?
Yeah, sure. He mentions, for example, changes in COVID-19 recommendations for children and pregnant people just being announced abruptly out of the blue. Another one he flags is the firing of scientists from ACP. That's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, a really important body. He notes this happened via an X post and an op-ed piece, not through, direct professional communication channels. He also highlights new ACIP members being announced on X before their onboarding and vetting were even finished, which suggests a kind of disregard for the established necessary processes. And perhaps most critically, he really slams the formation of a new ACIP work group specifically for COVID vaccine policy. He states it was filled with people of dubious intent and more dubious scientific rigor, and his fear. He believes this specific setup will result in death and disability of vulnerable children and adults. It's incredibly stark.
Incredibly stark, yes. So this pattern he's describing, these detailed examples, it really sounds like a systematic sidelining of the CDC's own expertise. How does he suggest this impacts the agency's actual ability to do its job, to fulfill its mandate?
Yeah, he voices that frustration very clearly. He notes that 7 months into this new administration, as he writes the letter, no CDC subject matter expert from my center has ever briefed the secretary on really crucial current topics. Things like measles outbreaks, avian flu, the seasonal respiratory viruses. He states his belief that the secretary is instead listening to unvetted and conflicted outside organizations over the gold standard science of CDC and other reputable sources. That directly challenges the scientific authority and the whole role of the CDC within the public health system. It suggests the agency's core expertise might be left on the shelf, its mission compromised.
Okay, so let's connect the dots here. What does Dr. Daskalakis say all of this ultimately means for public health? And importantly for you, our listener, why should these, specific internal battles inside government health agencies actually concern the wider public?
He ties it straight to the erosion of public trust. That's what he sees as one of the most dangerous outcomes here.
Yeah.
He even cites Secretary Kennedy's own public statement, where the secretary apparently said Americans shouldn't take medical advice from them. And Dr. Daskalakis then takes it a step further and says, essentially, I agree. He states the secretary should not be considered a source of accurate information. Now, that is an exceptionally direct critical statement, especially coming from a former top official about head of the entire department.
Wow, yeah. Extremely direct. So in Dr. Daskalakis' view, what are the potential long-term consequences if public trust in these established health authorities in science itself keeps eroding like this?
He gives a pretty stark warning, actually. He states that the intentional eroding of trust in low-risk vaccines favoring natural infection and unproven remedies will bring us to a pre-vaccine era, where only the strong will survive and many, if not all, will suffer. Now, he makes a point to say he believes in foundational health things, nutrition, exercise, healthy food, but crucially, he says he equally believes in using vaccines to prevent deaths and disability. He positions them as complementary tools, not things that contradict each other. So this really speaks to a fear that a fundamental shift in how the public sees these tools could lead to widespread, really negative health outcomes down the line.
And he goes even further, doesn't he? He touches on some incredibly sensitive topics. He mentions eugenics in the rhetoric he's hearing and expresses deep concern about efforts he sees to, quote, erase transgender populations, cease critical domestic and international HIV programming, and terminate key research to support equity, unquote. That really broadens his critique way beyond just vaccines or communication styles, doesn't it? It suggests a systemic issue with how vulnerable groups and established public health priorities are being treated, which he clearly finds, well, ethically unacceptable.
Absolutely. It paints a much wider picture of concern. And if we connect this to his sort of overarching philosophy, he states it very clearly. Public health is not merely about the health of the individual, but it is about the health of the community, the nation, the world. It's a collective responsibility. And he concludes with a really serious assessment. He says, the nation's health security is at risk and is in the hands of people focusing on ideological self-interest. So he's framing this whole situation not just as, his personal reasons for leaving, but as a direct threat, a threat to national security and global well-being.
Yeah, that reframing is powerful. Now, beyond the policy and the science disagreements, Dr. Daskalakis also brings a deeply personal angle to his resignation. It's pretty clear this wasn't just a professional calculation for him. What did he share about his personal motivations, his convictions?
He does, yeah. He explicitly states he's resigning partly to ensure he can remain true to my principles and find other ways to contribute effectively. But he also invokes his family history, which is quite moving. He says he is resigning in part to make his grandfather proud. His grandfather, he writes, stood up to fascist forces in Greece and lost his life doing so. That adds this profound moral dimension, doesn't it? It really indicates a deeply held, ingrained commitment to integrity, passed down through generations.
Yeah, that adds a lot of weight. He also addresses something else, a recent tragic event, a shooting at the CDC. He clarifies it wasn't the direct reason for his resignation, but he does connect the environment there, doesn't he?
He does. While saying the shooting wasn't the trigger, he links the broader environment to what he calls the cowardice of a leader that cannot admit that HEC, in his minions' words, over decades, created an environment where violence like this can occur. And he explicitly rejects their thoughts and prayers. He advises they direct those sentiments to people that they have not actively harmed. I mean, that's an incredibly powerful, direct rebuke. It implies a perceived responsibility or even culpability for the climate of discourse surrounding public health.
It really is. And it's striking, too, that despite this incredibly critical assessment of the current leadership and its approach, he still manages to express gratitude for his time at the CDC itself. How does that kind of, dichotomy, the sharp criticism alongside the gratitude, how does that shape his overall message?
I think it highlights something important. It shows his critique is really aimed squarely at the current leadership and the specific policies he disagrees with, rather than at the institution of the CDC itself, or its, thousands of dedicated staff members. He expresses heartfelt gratitude for the opportunities he had and for working alongside these dedicated professionals who are committed to improving health. And he adds, even when under attack from within, both physically and psychologically. So that suggests a deep respect, maybe even admiration, for the career staff and the enduring mission of the CDC, even while he feels he personally can no longer operate effectively within the current environment. It sort of separates the institution's fundamental purpose from what he clearly sees as its current dangerous misdirection.
That's a really key distinction. Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener, and maybe for the bigger picture of public health? Dr. Daskalakis' resignation letter, it really gives us this comprehensive account of why he left. He paints a picture, from his perspective, of an agency whose scientific integrity, whose communication processes have been seriously compromised in his view by political influence. And he explicitly calls for HHS, the department overseeing CDC, to reverse what he calls its dangerous course to dismantle public health as a practice and as an institution. He warns that staying on this path risks our personal well-being and the security of the United States.
Yeah, and I think this leaves us with a really important question to think about, doesn't it? What are the long-term consequences when really experienced scientific leaders, people who've dedicated their entire careers to protecting public health, feel they fundamentally cannot serve within the very institutions designed for that purpose? What kind of gap does that create, and how does that ultimately impact our collective ability as a nation to respond effectively to the next health crisis? Because there will always be a next one.
Indeed. That's a crucial question. This deep dive into Dr. Daskalakis' letter, it really gives us a rare, unfiltered look a glimpse into that complex, sometimes messy intersection of science, policy, and personal ethics right at the top levels of public health. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, of the human element, the principles, the people behind these vital institutions. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you a clearer understanding of the challenges, the debates that are shaping the future of public health, and maybe why it's just so important to pay attention to how our scientific institutions are being led and managed.
Absolutely. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking out reliable information from diverse, credible sources. Because really, an informed public is the bedrock. It's the first line of defense for public health. Your critical thinking, your engagement, it's more valuable now than ever.
And until next time, stay curious.